Welcome to the Disaster Resilience Planning for Heritage Resources video series. This video is the final installment in a four-part series to guide developing a disaster resilience plan for heritage resources in your community. This is based off a plan developed for heritage organizations in Cottage Grove, Oregon. The intent is to provide resources for heritage organizations, city planners, and other local government officials or concerned residents so that you all can make a similar plan in your own communities. This video will be structured like a Q&A panel. We have invited key stakeholders to share their experiences from each of their unique perspectives in the project. The learning objectives for this video are for viewers to understand the project from the perspective of various stakeholders and identify possible starting points and approaches for your organization or city. Now, let's meet our stakeholders. Please introduce yourselves.
My name is Amanda Ferguson, and I am the city planner for the city of Cottage Grove.
And I'm Beth Dean. I am the Heritage Coordinator for the Oregon Heritage Commission.
And I'm Curry Gill, and I'm the Grants and Outreach Coordinator for Oregon Heritage.
Thank you, and thank you all for taking the time to join us today. Now we will begin the Q&A session. Viewers, as each stakeholder shares their perspective, think about how the questions might apply to your own community. Question 1. The increasing occurrence of natural disasters in the coming years will impact a wide range of industries. A question for all our stakeholders is, why should a heritage organization develop a disaster resilience plan for heritage resources?
Well, from the city's perspective, I think it's really vital that our heritage organizations independently can be structured so that they can survive a disaster, because our resources at the city level may not be able to get out to them for a number of days in the case of a large event, or may take weeks depending on how long it takes, or they may always feel a little left out of the puzzle if there's not a life or safety issue with their structure. So it's vital that they have the resources to take care of themselves, at least initially. As a citywide, it's also really vital that we know what they need in order to be more resilient in the case of a disaster. And a plan like this gives the city the information as well to be part of the solution for their resilience.
From the Heritage Commission's perspective, I think it's really important to remember that heritage resources have great value to communities, so they represent the physical and intellectual past of that place. So making sure that there's a plan in place to make sure that those resources survive long-term is incredibly important, and we want to remind people to think about the value of what they have to offer during this process.
And I think in addition to that, when those resources remain, these heritage organizations can play a critical role in the whole community's recovery. It's a good grounding it's a good piece of grounding for people who are trying to get past what they've lost and collect each other and themselves and pull together and move forward. So I think it's a little under-recognized, but they can be a really vital participant in the whole community's recovery with their resources.
That's a really important point. Thank you for your responses. Question 2. Few local models integrating heritage resource preservation and disaster planning exist. Again, for all of our stakeholders, how much do heritage organizations need to know about hazard or disaster planning before initiating this type of project?
Well, I think we specifically designed this community approach so that some folks with base level knowledge can really support the majority. So I think anyone coming in with some knowledge would be useful, but the process has been created so that a community could go through this and work with the correct emergency personnel and the correct planning departments and so forth to move themselves through this process.
I would agree. For disaster planning in general, in my experience, you don't actually need to know a lot about even the terminology of a disaster plan in order to be able to recognize things that you can do within your own organization, your own home, your own life to become more resilient. So it just takes a few key words to trigger people to understand, oh, if I have that happens, then this happens. Yeah, so it's actually something that a lot of people can understand with only a little bit of background. And the guidebook is going to provide that background for them.
I agree. I think that there are some terms that the process that is going to be provided gives you the grounding so that everybody's at least using those terms the same way. I think that's the critical piece. Otherwise, I feel like people will discover that a lot of it is best practices activities for your organizations and ways to reach out to the community and make sure you're serving and accessing and providing resources to your whole community. So they tend to be things that layer on what they already are doing or want to be doing to move forward with their other goals.
I think, and to add to that, when we started this process, there's a lot of conversation about how this can feel like an overwhelming topic, but it doesn't have to be, right? And so I think that working together, you know, kind of helps break that down and not feel overwhelming.
Thank you for your responses. Question 3. Cottage Grove certainly is not the only community with a rich collection of heritage resources. Yet, they were chosen as a model city for this pilot project. From each of your perspectives, what about Cottage Grove made it a good candidate to embark on the journey of disaster planning for heritage resources?
I can start by saying I think we were targeted because of our partnerships with our heritage organizations, as well as the partnerships that our heritage organizations have between them. There's a really strong bond between most of the heritage organizations in Cottage Grove. They even have a group that they call Partners in History. And with the Partners in History, which is 4 different organizations that work together to do interpretive programs at our library, we have over the years joined the All-Star Heritage Community Program that the State Historic Preservation Office oversees. And we also have created a citywide preservation plan that is actually titled Partnering to Preserve Our Heritage. So it is those linkages between the organizations that I think made Cottage Grove a good candidate.
And as Amanda alluded to, Cottage Grove is one of the Oregon Heritage All-Star communities, which, just to add a little bit of context to that, means that that city has demonstrated a certain amount of criteria of how they're working together and the types and sort of variety and diversity of heritage assets that they have. So that was a wonderful place to start in terms of a pilot project to see how that could all work together.
I think also Cottage Grove has, as a city entity, but also as a community, has kind of a proven, at least recent track record of really caring about their heritage resources as a community and contributing to their preservation and fighting for their preservation. And there are several examples of that we've seen over the years. So a community that already has an appreciation for their heritage resources is one that's going to be willing to put in a little bit of work on this and see the value in it. I would also say they were willing to give it a shot, so thank you, Cottage Grove.
I also want to make it clear that it's also because we're only 25 miles from the U of O, so it made it easy to work with the University of Oregon students on this.
Question 4. Planning, though a generic sounding word, is an actual field of study with language, tools, and skill sets that can be quite unfamiliar to someone approaching it from the outside. What are some do's and don'ts for successful sitting planning for heritage resources? And how can this field be made accessible to heritage organizations and citizens that may be initiating this plan without their local government?
So from a city's perspective, I think the single most important thing is know what your community considers important. And don't assume that you know what your community considers important. It's really vital that you know what the people in your community need and value as part of their history. So what, after a disaster, what are they going to really want to see restored? One of the things I found in Cottage Grove, working here for many years is that it's the small elements that make up our heritage that are the most important to our community. And I have learned that through a number of different tools, of course, through surveys, through working with the individual heritage organizations, to helping develop a history pub where we give history presentations once a month with Main Street, to learn that, it's really the small things that matter. And those small things together create the heritage of Cottage Grove, which is why, again, our plan actually focuses on heritage rather than specific historic resources, because it's really easy instead to just focus on those big, pretty buildings and say that those are the most important things, or it might be the Titanic coat that's stored in your museum is actually more important than the big buildings downtown. But it's really important that you learn those lessons and then take those pieces and try to figure out how you're going to help those ideas and things that people really love be resilient. So how do you make this easier for people to understand? I don't think that you need to come at disaster resilience planning with a whole lot of background knowledge, a little bit of understanding of the language and the terminology, but you can read the guidebook in order to get that. We'll give you that comfort level in order to delve into this. But city planning, the words themselves, should be, after just a little bit of reading around, something that you can approach without being too intimidated by. Hopefully it doesn't look like transportation planning, which is very opaque. For the rest of preservation planning normally is actually pretty easy to understand. I'd really encourage local groups, if their city isn't involved, to encourage them to become involved. Sometimes it's figuring out that one person within the city who has an interest in it. They may or may not be actually into disaster preservation, but maybe they're your person who's helping your historic landmark commission work through projects. They may be the city manager, in our case, is actually really very passionate about downtown. It may be your library person. It may be all sorts of different people might be interested, and using them as an inroad in order to get the city involved.
So essentially the role of the planner is a fluid one, and anyone can provide their expertise and resources to this process.
Absolutely. I mean, it's city planning, it's community planning. So in many ways, we are trying to listen to the community. So there are lots of different ways to go about it.
Question 5. In a project like this, everyone needs to start somewhere, but it's important to know that there is a lot of support available to kickstart this process. What are the resources available at the state and national level to help a city or organization initiate this process? And this question is for Oregon Heritage representatives.
So the first thing I want to bring up in response to this question is, because there are so many moving parts and interests in doing a community-wide heritage disaster planning process, is don't tie yourself to only one thing. So in the state of Oregon and in line with federal, you could align yourself with emergency management programs and resources, both at the federal and state level, and actually at the county level, and do that for sure, at least be in communication with all of those entities. But they do have resources to bring to the table that might not seem obvious. So also don't just do a search for grants and only go for grants. Sometimes you can find a really great partnership with these organizations where they have resources that aren't available through a grant program, but if you're working with them, they can bring them to the table. And then also consider preservation programs. So the National Trust for Historic Preservation, National Park Service, Institute for Museum and Library Services all have programming and partnership development opportunities and training that can contribute to this in addition to grant opportunities. Oregon Heritage, of course, is a great resource, and we can help you find other resources, but we have grant programs. We have resources for city landmark commissions to get involved and provide training for them. And then also be creative on kind of what I mentioned before about the value and just to the community of these heritage resources, but also their value as a recovery tool for the whole community. And so you might think about organizations like Oregon Humanities who can help you have those community conversations, who can help you reach out to folks and understand and work with them to understand what your priorities are, figure out who you're missing in the conversation and how to get them to the table. Or also if they're controversial things, because that can happen with heritage resources, they could help you talk through how to manage controversial historic resources and how to process that and recognize it and address that so that people learn and the community is really engaged.
Okay, question 6. Something that became quite central to this project was an ongoing dialogue about the implications of diverse representation of voices in the planning process and diverse representation of cultures in the heritage resources themselves. The 2020 Oregon Heritage Plan aims to strengthen Oregon's heritage by including goals to diversify heritage resource planning and representation and expanding access to resources. Again, for Oregon heritage representatives, why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important to disaster resilience planning for heritage resources? And as a follow-up question, how are the goals of the Oregon Heritage Plan realized in the disaster resilience planning for heritage resources pilot project in Cottage Grove?
I'll start out with the first part of that question. I think this is a community planning process, and so we know that the more voices that are at the table, the better product you're going to get out of it. And this is really an opportunity to build relationships and build collaborative situations within the community. So it is important that this project reaches as many folks as possible. As Amy mentioned, the Oregon Heritage Plan outlines 4 goals that I think are all relevant to this discussion that came up. The first goal is to include more voices. We know that heritage is strengthened when we hear more histories from different people. That represents our communities in a much more holistic way. The second one is increasing access to heritage. So we want people to who may not know about these organizations or who may not have been previously represented in what's happening in the community in terms of documenting history, that they can be part of it and that they feel that they're part of it. Promoting the value, I think, is really important. This process is all about promoting value. If you're taking the time to create a plan to maintain these assets for the future, despite whatever natural or man-made disaster comes along, like that's an incredibly important piece of this. And the fourth goal of the Heritage Plan is best practices. And it is a best practice, again, to include as many folks as possible in that. I think one of the interesting things that came out of this process was an aspect of it is the community survey. And so we saw that the more people in the community can reach out to get input on the value and their impressions of what's important, I think the better information you have to work with in terms of thinking through how to prioritize and how to put this plan in place. So I don't know, Curry, you can add to that. All of these points I think are really important, but it all comes down to the more voices at the table, the better product you get and the better relationships you're building in the community.
I agree with all of that. I also think some early on conversation before the process starts to consider that in part of the advanced planning so that everybody's prepared and we know what to expect. And we even have, if challenges come up with especially inclusion and things like that we're prepared to actually respond to it pretty upfront and sort of build it into the whole process from the beginning so that everybody knows what expectations are and we're prepared and we have people who are prepared to, if issues come up, to address them and make sure that everyone who's participating feels welcomed and heard and safe to do so.
Thank you for sharing. I think these conversations are really important to be having, especially now more than ever. Question 7. How do you see the outcomes of this process being of use in the coming years? And this is for all of our stakeholders.
I'm personally really excited to see some of our little heritage organizations um, get kickstarted to really considering themselves as, first of all, valuable to the community as a whole, and then seeing how they can make that value itself more inclusive of the members of our community and reach more of our community. I think one of the best things that's going to come out of and involving more at the equity conversation into this disaster planning process is really encouraging those heritage groups to consider that there's a broader audience that they both could be addressing but also should be addressing, and how that will benefit them in the future. And also just the simple mechanisms of thinking through their own processes and what they would do in order to create a disaster plan for themselves, and then how that larger plan, that small plan can fit into the larger plan, are really going to help them long-term survive. And the survival of these heritage organizations is personally really vital to me, and I think it should be vital to all of us. It's what creates community. So making sure these tiny groups actually are still around in 10 and 15 and 20 years and have a larger number of people who are coming both through their doors, but whom they're also reaching, is really vital. So, this is one of the ways of doing that. I think resilience doesn't have to be just in the context of a disaster, but it's also just organizational resilience. And I think that this is part of what that will build.
I think the thing that I would add to that is that unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more natural disasters happening in the world, and as well as man-made disasters. And I think this idea of resilience comes with preparation and knowing what your plan is so that you can react when you need to react.
I like the idea of it being a model for other communities to give it a try. So I think that's really exciting. And then for Cottage Grove in particular, it's encouraging them to be creative. It's encouraging them to think big, which I think a lot of heritage organizations have a hard time doing. The scale of stuff for them is much smaller and closer to them. And when they get inspired with other people and build a new relationship, the idea of some massive project seems like a real possibility. And there are some creative ideas coming from this. And if even one of those follows through with success, like what that will drive, I think is really exciting. So I plan to follow what comes from this and hopefully share it with others, because I think that the seed is there, and there are already newer connections within this community that already had connections, and I think that that's exciting. And if they take on a big thing and have success with it, it will just be the first of many.
Thank you. So we are planting seeds here, and there's a lot of hope for the future. So thank you for your responses. Our final question for all of our stakeholders: name one important takeaway from your involvement in this project. What advice would you give to organizations and communities who are working to develop their own heritage resource resilience plans?
I would say focus on something that you can do that meets multiple disasters, first of all. So don't focus on one specific type of disaster, focus on all of them, and do something that it kind of has multiple impacts. Focus on the small things and they build from there. And then as a city, really look at how we can take the things that overlap and help move those forward. All planning is like that. It's because like, where do you find the overlaps and how do you make those overlaps more tangible to the organizations and more vital? It saves our resources if we can use lots of overlap and see how all of these groups work together. So I'm excited. Let's go.
Thank you for sharing.
That was the same thing I was going to say, because I think this is about don't feel overwhelmed, right? This is your chance, as Amanda said, to lean on the other organizations and the other expertise that exists in the community to strengthen what you have. So this is all about the partnership and building those relationships.
In addition to those thoughts, I think I think that this is never ending. And so keeping in mind to not be overwhelmed and know that when you come up with a product, there could always be more to add to it. There will be new next steps. But if you come up with a plan, and you knock off a couple, and then you revisit it, and then add more, and then knock off a couple and revisit it and add more, you move on. So it's an ongoing commitment. And I think the other thing that I like about it, I'll just add it and pretend it's one, is that by doing this together as a group, it kind of forces us to keep checking in on it and keep checking off the boxes and keep adding more, and then keep checking in and checking off the boxes and adding more. Whereas in one organization, they have 18,000 other things to be doing, and they have intentions to do it, but that can't be the thing that stays with them all the time. But when you are meeting regularly with these other people who are committed to this community-wide effort, it makes it easier to do that and keep going.
All right. Thank y'all so much for your important insights. We're very gracious of you joining us today and sharing your perspectives. I think it'll be very useful for the viewers of this video. All right, communities, now it's your turn. Because each community is unique, it's important to find the launching point most suitable for you. That means starting where you are, recognizing your capacities, and using the resources you have available to your advantage. Please look to our model guidebook for disaster resilience planning for heritage resources for more detailed guidance for carrying out this process. This project was a result of a partnership between the University of Oregon's Institute for Policy Research and Engagement, the All-Star Heritage Community of Cottage Grove, the Oregon Heritage Program staff, and staff from the city of Cottage Grove. We hope this helps you and your community develop strategies to protect your resources. Good luck.